Hey guys, I'm here with another video today. I want to talk about there's a new report out called Hidden Tribes, a study of America's polarized landscape. And this this report talks about how the far progressive left, or regressive left if you will, only constitute like 8% of the population. And I'm seeing a lot of videos where people are like, yay, that's great news, it's only a small population, they have a strong voice, but they're not going to do anything because they're such a small population. And the people who are politically disengaged, which I would say is probably most of America, their core values kind of align more with like people in the center right and whatnot. So we don't fear that those people are going to move over to the progressive side of things. And I've seen a lot of videos celebrating that. And I think there's a very disturbing trend in this report, especially when you take some historical context. Ronald Reagan once said that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism, which is, I think we're seeing now. I think people who are politically engaged, who are center-left, center-right, or just in the center, they can see this trend happening. And I think this report, Hidden Tribes, they're kind of wiping their brow off saying, whew, it's only a small percentage of the population of the people I fear. I want to get some historical context to this. Now, I do agree with Ronald Reagan. If fascism ever comes to America, will become in the name of liberalism, which I think is accurate. So what is fascism, right? I think we all know what socialism is because it's been such a buzzword today. I think most people understand, it's a planned economy by the state. You're not entitled to your labor, essentially. The state owns it and they distribute to everyone's need. But they say that's kind of like on the left spectrum, and they put fascism on the far right spectrum. With communism being far left, fascism being far right. And that's kind of incorrect, right? So both the far left and the far right can be fascist, right? Fascism is characterized by a dictatorial power, forcible suppression of opposition, strong regimentation of society and of the economy, which you can look at, the USSR. That, especially Stalin's USSR. That was fascism, right? Fascism is more of how government is being enforced as opposed to just the economic policy of socialism, right? Socialism is more of an economical ideology, whereas fascism is much more broader. And it can include socialism. And I think what's happening is that we're quick to label fascism as far right, so that way people don't associate it with the far left, which I think is by design. So, who are the famous and fascists that everybody knows about? Nazis, right? And Nazis are kind of today's boogeymen. So, but we have to look, what is Nazism? Nazism was created as an alternative to the rising of a communist threat, right? So after World War I, people felt that the communists were gaining power and they were going to be a power in Germany, and people were worried about that. But because Nazism is definitely, they were fascist, but because of that, they're kind of penultimate fascists. With Mussolini, they're put on the far right spectrum. But if you look at Nazi Germany's, their economy, there was a lot of socialized, planned economy in there. And even their rhetoric in their early days was, against big business. It was against the bourgeois, and it was against capitalism. Anybody who's read Hitler's speeches would clearly identify those themes in his speeches. So fascism can come in the form of a political and economic ideology that is placed in the far left spectrum. It's not to the far right spectrum only. And again, I think their current branding as a far right ideology is downplay what the progressives, what their tactics and intentions are. So we were brought up to believe that the German people fell into Nazism because it talked to the Germans' sense of pride and nationalism that they had lost in World War One, right? And it gave people a boogeyman to blame their economic woes on. That's what the Nazis did. And we believe, or we're taught, that this is what caused Hitler's rise to power, right? But Hitler was, yes, he was the chairman of the party at what, after a few years after its founding, but he was a tool in the early days of the Nazi Party. So what were the Nazis? The Nazis were a small political party that was founded during post-World War I, and Germany was experiencing a depression, right? And back to what I was saying about the country felt like they're lower standing in the geopolitical stage after surrendering World War I. So there was a group of people who were definitely elites, right? You have Eckhart, who was a huge power within the early Nazi Party. He was definitely within that elite group, right? And then you had people like Goring, who was also an elite. He was a famous World War I pilot. I mean, he was a hero to the people of Germany. And then you had people like Himmler, Rahm, of course Goebbels, Drexler, who were all elitists. A lot of them had, they were either wealthy, they had connections, or they were a very educated class of people, right? And then we came down to Hitler, who his father was a businessman, and I wouldn't say he was exactly poor growing up, but he was definitely disenfranchised because he wanted to be an artist and he was being rejected, and he started reading the early works of what was then at the time the earliest form of the Nazi Party. It wasn't called the Nazis then, which talked about the anti-Jewish rhetoric, which kind of spoke to him. But what Hitler had was amazing charisma, right? He was a great. He gave powerful speeches. He was people really loved hearing him speak. He was an excellent orator, and the Nazi Party realized, or the early Nazis realized this, and it was Dietrich Eckart, who gave Hitler his. He started mentoring Hitler, saying, "Okay, you're kind of rough around the edges, but let me help you out." And through Eckart's mentoring, Hitler became very, very, very. Hitler became very powerful. He became a very powerful member within the party, simply because of his charisma. Now, what was the main problem of the Nazi Party was that they found success, but it was kind of a little too late, right? So during the era of hyperinflation post World War I, which ended until the mid 1920s. Before then, they did find some sort of foothold, right? People were listening because they were saying, "Hey, the economy's depressed. We know how to fix it." And because of this, people started listening to the Nazis, to the Nazi Party, and it definitely spoke to some people. But the problem is that by the mid-1920s, the economy stabilized, and Nazis lost the key to their success. The economy was doing much better. People were doing better because of a rising economy. So because of that, people were less engaged with the political process, and so people kind of forgot about the Nazis in a sense. So when things are, and this is typical, when things are going good, people tend to be less political. They're less politically engaged. They only really become super engaged when they feel like things are bad. So in this case, the primary message of the Nazi Party at the time was how to fix the economy. But now it's falling on deaf ears because the economy was on the rise. But with that being said, the Nazis had gotten a small foot in the door of the political stage. So fast forward a few years, about 4 to 5 years, the Great Depression happened. And this affected the German economy massively. So they were now in another depression. And this opened the door for the Nazis, right? They already had their foot in the door, but now the door swung wide open. And they jumped in on this depression as a political tool. This time with the power they originally gained, they were able to make the case to a depressed people that this isn't their fault, that the German people deserve better, and the Nazis were the ones that delivered them from that depression. And the German people fell for it, right? It was the right message at the right time, or I guess you could say wrong message at the wrong time. And at that point, they started getting seats, and I think at that, pretty much from that point forward, I think the history's kind of clear. You know, they started getting more seats in the Reichstag. Then you had the Reichstag fire, which gave Hitler a reason for more power. The Night of Long Lives, which was him consolidating his power. And then the final nail in the coffin was the death of President Hindenburg, which then Hitler decided to do away with the seat of the president, and thus he became the sole power of the sole political power in Germany. So what does that mean with today, right? So in today's society, in today's America, what does that mean? So back to this report, Hidden Tribes, a study of America's polarized landscape, I think there's some disturbing trends here, right? So when reading this report, it's a huge report, right? But essentially, what it goes down to is you have the progressive activists, right? These are the people who probably align themselves with Antifa. You have traditional liberals and then passive liberals, and then you have politically disengaged moderates, traditional conservative, and devoted conservatives. And devoted conservatives being like the main people who are just, you know, like super neocons and stuff like that. But they kind of break all this whole thing out into three kind of major groups here. You have the wings, right, which is traditional conservatives and devoted conservatives, and then on the right, and then you have progressive activists on the left. And then you have the exhausted majority, which is people who are just tired of politics, right? They're moderate, they're disengaged, which means they don't really care about politics at all. Or they're just passive, or they're your traditional liberals, you know, like I guess you could say Clinton Democrats, or maybe even Reagan Democrats, which, you know, the Blue Dogs, which I don't even know if that exists anymore. I mean, well, they do say it's only 11%. So, if you look at it here, this is like half of the population of America right here within the exhausted majority. So, these people right now, they're tired of it. Especially the politically disengaged, they don't care. There's more important things in life, right? They got bills to pay, they got children, you know, they go to work, you know, they just care about, you know, putting food on the table. So I needed a drink. I was getting a little bit of dry mouth there. So why is it disturbing? Okay, and I think it kind of goes to Antifa, right? And if you really want to go back, Antifa, or the current progressive activist part, the far left, I think kind of started with the Occupy Wall Street. And I think people realized that there was some power in that progressive left. And not saying that everybody in Occupy was progressive left, but quite a few number of them are. And I think a lot of those people who were on the extreme left side have moved on to Antifa. So you had an economic depression in 2008, right? And there was this huge uproar, everybody being very, very, you know, they were in a depressed state. It became very politically active. And I think that's why Obama was able to get into office, because he had this, you know, the hope and change message. You know, the politically disengaged, exhausted majority were revved up because of the depression, right? And because he had such a fresh message, he was elected. And then the economy started doing better, and people stopped caring again, right? Except for the people on the wings. They're the only ones who are really vocal. So there's a lot of similarities between Antifa and Nazism, right? They live on identity politics, right? Seriously, they do. They're anti-capitalist, anti-big business. They are anti-bourgeois, and they're incredibly racist, just like the Nazis. And then you have the Antifa, who are just basically like the brown shirts of the Nazi Party, right? And there's amazing parallels in that. So I think with the Depression of 2008, there was very disorganized, but there was kind of the message, there was a foothold in the message. Just like how post-World War I Germany, the Nazis were able to get a foothold in the message. And the Nazi Party was founded by elitists. And if you look at the progressive left today, they are full of elites, very rich and powerful people, people who control the media, right? People who, I mean, you look at CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, CBS, all of them are controlled by these progressive activists, right? They control the media. They are elites, right? Just like how the founding of the Nazi Party was elites. Now, where the differences fall is that there's not a party, right? I think the left is trying to co-opt the Democratic Party to be their party. So Antifa's trying to co-opt the Democratic Party to be their party. And there's no centralized committee, I guess you could say. You have the DNC. They don't know the DNC doesn't even know what they're trying to do. So you have a lot of outside forces trying to steer the Democratic Party to what they want to be. And the other thing is that Antifa doesn't have an organized, it's not truly organized in the way that the brown shirts were. You had Rahm, who in the Nazi Party, he led the brown shirts. He was a military commander. He was very regimented, very strict. He had commanded great respect, which made him dangerous. But he was able to get the brown shirts into an organized force. Antifa lacks that right now. If they had that, they'd be they would be a lot more dangerous than they are now. Right now, they're just kind of running amok. But then who's not to say that's not going to happen? Now, the economy is doing well, right? I think the exhaustive majority are okay with how things are going right now. And if things continue going the way they are right now, Donald Trump will probably be reelected, right? The incumbent always has an advantage, right? Because they have a lot more time to stump for one person, as opposed to the Democrats. They're going to have to go through the whole primary process, which just completely destroys, they break each other down before they come down to a single candidate that they can try to prop up, because the Republicans have a big lead time in doing that for Trump. So, and if things continue going well, then Trump will probably get reelected. Now, a lot of economists believe we are in. So we are due for a depression, right? For a stock market crash. So if you look at 2008 was our early 1920 Germany, right? You had very far left people who saw that as a way of gaining control. They did too little too late. They were completely disorganized, and it just... And the Depression really continued through the Obama years. I mean, we had such small growth. So it was almost an extended Depression, but it was too little too late. They didn't organize quick enough. They didn't get their message. They didn't clarify their message early enough. So it was too little too late. So once Trump was elected, the economy started going good. This is like the mid-1920s Germany. Economy stabilized. Nazis' messages were falling on deaf ears. People were less engaged because things are going well, right? But they're still in the spotlight. They're still stumping. If there is another depression in the Trump era of America, right, another big stock market crash, and right now they feel there's a massive bubble that's going to crash big, and it's going to crash hard. If that happens during Trump, what's going to happen is that the opposition is going to have a huge political gain in that. And who is the opposition? Who has the biggest voice right now? It's 8%, but they definitely have the biggest voice in the Democratic Party. They are going to wake up this exhausted majority, and they're going to start pulling those people over, and they're going to start grabbing power and seizing power. Now, the question is that if they continue to remain disorganized, then they may not, right? But if that crash happens during Trump's era, then that 8% is going to increase. And I think it's going to increase by a large margin, because if the crash is going to be as bad as people are predicting, then people are going to be very, very, very upset. And then you're going to have these loud voices that are controlled by an elite who are going to win people over their side, and they're slowly going to gain power, and they're slowly going to centralize their power. I mean, you see that now with the Social Democrats. They are socialists. They say they are like, oh, we're like the Nordic country socialists. No, they're not. They're nothing like that. They're actually true socialists. They don't want you to own your labor. They are going to get more people because that message during a depression sounds good. That's what the message the Nazis had. That's what message the Soviets had, the Bolsheviks. That was their message to a depressed people. And it works, right? Now, if Trump gets reelected and then the crash happens, I could see that happening. And if that progressive, that 8% grows in that time frame, you're going to see Antifa get more organized. You're going to see these elites get more organized. It could be that the Democratic Party as a whole completely falls to them, right? And this is not hyperbole. This is just, right now, what we're looking at is 1925 to 1929 Germany, right? Replace progressive activists with Nazis, and you have exactly where we are. We have an economy that's doing better from a depression. We have people who are war weary, just like the Germans are. We have an elite class who are in this progressive activist section, right? They're just waiting for the Trump economy to crash, or the stock market to crash, and then they're going to jump on it. They just need to be politically engaged, or not politically, they need to be organized enough to cash in on it. But, you know, again, the Nazis were not that organized per se. There was a lot of power infighting and power struggles even during that time. So it's a super scary trend. Now, if we get 8 years of Trump and 8 years of economic growth, and then more than likely a Democrat will probably get elected after Trump's second term. I'd be surprised if it was another Republican. It may be, who knows? I mean, you had Bush after Reagan. But if there's an economic crash during with a Democrat at the helm, then we would be safe from fascism coming to America. But if there is a economic crash during Trump's first or second term, and if we're not careful, fascism is going to come to America. The seed has been planted, the foot is in the door, and they're going to come rushing in when things are looking bad for the state, for the nation. So a lot of people are celebrating this report, taking into context how it looks now versus, you know, we're now war-weary America. We're America recovering from a depression, and we have these voices. And you have to admit, the progressive activists are very engaged, and they're willing to do anything and everything to seize power, just like the Nazis. I mean, it's actually very scary. This report scares me. I'm glad it's not more than 8%, but then again, the Nazis had probably even less control than that in the mid to late 1920s. So we are in a very tenuous time. We're literally on a knife's edge. And I do fear if there is another stock market crash during Trump, another major depression during Trump, America is going to embrace fascism, and it's going to come in the name of liberalism. So I recommend you guys read this report. I'll leave a link in the description below. There's a lot of information here about how they collected the data and everything, and it's very interesting. But where the biggest thing comes into play here is this. This is kind of an aggregate of all the data below, and it's how they came up with this 8% versus, you know, for the progressive activists and 6% devoted conservatives. But this right here is the main thing here. I do recommend reading this, so that way you understand what the core beliefs are for a progressive, and what are the beliefs of a devoted, you know, conservative, and what does the exhaustive majority mean, in much more detail than what I described here. It's an excellent report, and a lot of people are celebrating it, but people need to be very, very careful. But anyways, if you like this video, and if I got anything wrong historically, you know, about the Nazis' rise to power, I mean, I gave a very, very, very brief summary of the Nazis' rise to power. I think that a lot of people may not know, but I think the context is important. But if you have any comments, criticism, I'm definitely open to it. You can reach me on Twitter or leave a comment on YouTube. You know, if you enjoy the video, leave a like and hit that subscribe button and ring that little bell, as they say, because, you know, YouTube is going to YouTube. So anyways, take it easy, guys. I'll see you next time.